We have Becka Downard with the Utah Geological Survey with mud, bugs, and plants, where to find data on all the wetland things. Thank you, and Becka, take it away.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you guys today about all of the data apps that we have to get all of our wetland data out to you guys. Before I jump into it, I need to acknowledge that I'm just the messenger. This is the work of so many other people, both people creating the data and then people in other agencies that have shared their data with us, and within the Utah Geological Survey, the people that actually take our visions of these apps and make them real. It's a huge effort. It's a little odd for a wetland program to be located within a geological survey. I'm not sure if that is the case for any other state, but based on the work that we do, it really makes sense with the mission of our agency. The mission of the UGS is to provide timely scientific information about Utah's resources, and the monitoring and the mapping work that we do really helps us share this with other people who need it to make decisions. And then our group has moved more towards doing outreach. And this is lined up really well with the vision of our agency to make all Utahns aware of the information that we have and use it to improve their lives. So I'm not going to be talking about any of our reports. We do really great reporting and you should definitely read them, but I'm going to focus instead on our apps. So if you want to use that data for your own purposes or just to know what's around you, you can do that. So Utah is not necessarily known for all of its wetlands. We actually have 1.5 million acres of wetlands and riparian habitat around the state, but the state is much bigger than that. So that represents less than 3% of the entire state. And that makes the ecosystem services that our wetlands provide especially crucial because those services are really rare on the landscape. The best way to preserve, protect, restore our resources is to know where they are, what they are. And so our mapping projects have done a lot towards that. Has anybody used the National Wetland Inventory? All right. So this is a nationwide data set that tells us both where our wetlands are and what type of wetlands we have. So it's started in 1974, and originally they were all hand-drawn maps. So in the 80s, they were created for the state of Utah. They ended up creating 51,000 hand-drawn maps. But the 1980s was not necessarily a representative decade for water in the state of Utah. So we've been continually updating these maps based on current conditions, and now we have so many more tools than they had in the 1980s. We can use multiple years of aerial imagery. It's much higher quality aerial imagery. And then we have other data sets like LIDAR that can tell us what's going on in the surface, or the National Hydrography data set. Lots of things coming together. So what this results in is maps where you can see where our deeper habitats are in the darker blue, where our emergent wetlands are, and we can add a few more details about this. I did not dare do a live demonstration of 11 different apps. I am a coward, but if you want to look at these, that's what the QR code in the top of the screen is. Or if you go to geology.utah.gov, you can also find all of these. If you go to the Utah Wetland Mapper, this is what pops up, and I put a star where we are at the Cultural Celebration Center. If you zoom in, you can see the light green and the light blue polygons. Those are some of our wetlands. And if you click on them, you can see what we know about that wetland. So this coordinate attribute, PEM5C, tells us this is a floodplain wetland and it's got emergent vegetation. So it's some kind of marsh. 5 tells us that vegetation is actually Phragmites. And then the C, the last one on there, is the water regime. This is a seasonally flooded wetland. And I actually verified this a few years ago during one of my first symposium visits, went and took a picture of that beautiful Phragmites, because as much as it's also kind of pretty. So you can do this for wherever you're interested in. You can zoom in on your own location. You can look across the landscape. We've got tools on the wetland mappers that you can calculate wetland area within watersheds of interest. You can look at things like stressors that are nearby. So there's a lot you can look at there. And some of the things that you can use this for, really helpful with planning. If you want to avoid damage to your resources, it's helpful to know where they are first. So go to NWI. You can use it for permitting review. One important caveat with this: we are using a biological definition of wetlands. These are places with wetland hydrology, vegetation, soils. That is different from a legal definition of a wetland. So if you need to do anything that requires a permit, start with NWI, but you do have to go in and look at that on the ground. You can use this to identify sensitive lands that you might want to incorporate into your planning processes, critical habitat for wildlife that you might be interested in. 75% of Utah's wildlife needs wetlands at some point in their life, so they're going to be in these places. You can look at river corridor protections, areas that you might want to target for watershed restoration activities, and then recreation resources. I got into this field because I really wanted to talk about water rights and look at birds, and wetlands are the place to do that. One of our apps that doesn't get very much traffic, but it does take a lot of work, is the Utah Wetland Permit Database. We were asked in 2022 to put all of the Section 404 permits across the state up on our website. So this site has everything from 2012, and it will have up to 2025. I'm cleaning that data right now. But that goes over more than 2,000 projects with more than 4,500 impacts associated with them. And then we also have the data on the mitigation practices associated with those permits. You can download that data as a CSV file if you want, or you can download it as a geodatabase. So NWI tells us a lot about the what and the where our wetlands are and what type of things they are. But if you really want to use this for planning purposes, for research, you need to know a little bit more about the context of these wetlands. So in our more recent projects, the ones that are highlighted in purple there, we've started adding additional attributes to our analyses. One of the things that we do is calculate the likelihood of a wetland being really high functioning for different things. So you can zoom into a spot like this wetland by Utah Lake and see where are wetlands that are really good for bank stabilization, if that's something that you're trying to work on. We also do what's called LLWW. It's a horrible name, but it's really cool data that comes up with it. It tells you not only that this is an emergent wetland, which is what all of those different colors are usually mapped at, but also what's the water source to that wetland? How does water move through it? So with this additional attribution, we can see that this is a slope wetland, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's on a slope. And water flows through it. So there's a water source and then there's a water outlet. And then we also have identified the likely water supplies. This is really important as we're researching more about irrigation efficiency. We're coming up with groundwater management programs. This particular wetland has two different water supplies. One of them is groundwater and the other is irrigation. So any changes to those water supplies are going to affect the wetlands here. If you want to know more about this, we have a really beautiful story map that our mappers put together that describe this in detail and also show you ways that you could potentially use the data, some of the wetland loss trends in the state, and then where you can access the data. So this is a really accessible resource for what ends up being kind of a complicated thing once you start digging into those codes. If you want the data, the National Wetland Inventory is run by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they ask us for updates every 6 months. So going to the Fish and Wildlife Service is the best place to get that data. If you want any of our other data, the LLWW stuff, our function assessments, calculations on landscape stressors and things like that, go to the Wetland Mapper. And then on the left side menu, they've got all the different layers that we've put up on this mapper. You click the 3 dots next to it and it'll give you a download window and you can get all of this data and do whatever you'd like with it. One thing before I move on from mapping is my own personal sense of shame and kind of bugaboo. Has anybody said that 75% of Utah's wetlands are around Great Salt Lake? I've done it so many times. One of the problems is that's not true. I was asked a couple of years ago to track down the source of that citation, and I felt terrible that I couldn't find it. So I went to NWI because it was updated in Utah in 2014 for Great Salt Lake, and calculated how many of our different wetland types are actually within an elevation boundary that would make them a Great Salt Lake wetland. It's about 4,220 feet. And if we look at just our big playas and mudflats, 77% of them are around Great Salt Lake, but that's like the bed of Great Salt Lake. No matter how I calculated the total, I couldn't come up with that 75% number. It's probably about 30 to 35%, but one of the things you can do is use NWI to calculate just how many acres there are in your area of interest. This in no way makes Great Salt Lake less special. This is the only place in our state that we have so many wetlands together as one contiguous lump. But what this does suggest is that one of the things that we need to do is keep all the other wetlands in the state in mind as we are working on protecting our aquatic resources. Oh, and one more plug, I'm not sure where I put it. This map shows the decades that our NWI was updated. So everything in the purple, that's been updated in the last 5 years. Everything in red was done under that original 1980s imagery. However, we're not the only people updating NWI. St. Mary's, Montana State University, Colorado Natural Heritage Program, as well as Ducks Unlimited are all working on updating this as well. So it's likely that within the next 3 to 4 years, a lot of that red area that we don't have a lot of good data for is gonna be updated. So I'm very excited about that. Okay, now we're gonna go into the data on what's in the wetlands. So wetlands have 3 parts: wetland hydrology, soils, and vegetation. It's actually kind of hard for plants to live in wetlands. There's too much water and it makes life just a little bit hard. So wetland plants have adaptations to that, and they're also the part that we can really easily see as we're trying to assess the health of our wetlands. And we've got this wetland plant app that was developed a few years ago to actually share all of the vegetation data from multiple agencies and organizations. We've got more than 550 individual wetland sites here with all the vegetation data. So there's more than 400 species that folks have found in these sites. And this is something that we continue to update. So if you have vegetation data that you want out there, send it to me. I'm really excited about it. There's a few different ways that you can search this app. One of them is just like we did with the NWI. You can zoom in to your area of interest, in this case, West Valley and the Cultural Celebration Center, and look for a site that's nearby. So I picked one up by Decker Lake. It's about a mile away. And if you click on it, it's gonna show you everything that we found there. All the plant species, attributes associated with them, and they've actually used that to calculate the quality of that wetland. So we can look and see, is this wetland is it something we need to restore? Or maybe this is an example of a really good wetland that we want to recreate. The one by Decker Lake is not. It doesn't have a lot of native vegetation, but that means it's got a lot of potential. You can also search by different attributes. So what I've got up here is all of the sites on this app in the Great Basin, because that's where I'm studying right now. And then marshes are my favorite wetland type, so I limited it to that. And it came up with about 120 sites that have data on them. Because I'm interested in this question of reference condition, I can pick out the row that says high quality reference wetland and see what that actually is. And this is a site that I actually visited when I was in graduate school, so I'm really familiar with it. It's really gorgeous. This is one that, as we're planning our watershed protections, We want to make sure we're keeping these high value wetlands intact. And also it's a good standard for us when we're trying to restore marshes. We want to see these plant species. You can also search it by species type. So if you're looking for all the locations, we've found a specific plant that you're really interested in. In this case, pickleweed is my favorite plant, and we have it in 118 sites just within this region and database. So really cool app. If you're looking for plant lists before you go out and do vegetation surveys, this is a really great place to start. Another great resource that has come out of all of our monitoring and assessment is the Wetland Plants Guide of the Central Basin and Range. It has 190 wetland species that are common in the region. This came out last summer, 2024. And if you go visit the wetlands table upstairs, we have free copies of this. You can also get it for free online at that QR code. Really, really great resource there. A lot of what the survey does in addition to mapping is monitoring and assessment, going out and looking at the health of wetlands across the state. And to do this, they developed the Utah Rapid Assessment Protocol, or URAP. This is designed to get baseline conditions of wetland health across the state. And since 2013, they've visited more than 500 different locations and gotten all the vegetation data there, all of the stressor data, and they've actually published the methodology if this is something that you want to use for yourself. It's there at that QR code. We're currently on version 3 of the URAP protocol, and in 2 years, we'll have version 4. Thing I've spent the last 2 summers doing is testing how we can adapt URAP to do both this baseline inventory, but also what if we wanted to apply it to monitoring our restoration and management efforts. So we've taken it out to restoration sites where Phragmites has been removed, where Watershed Restoration Initiative and 319 funds have been spent to see, can we track this change and come up with a number that is really relevant to the people actually doing management and restoration. So look for that in a couple of years. We also have another really amazing story map that goes through what can be really nitty-gritty wetland condition stuff and explains what that means. This one is focused on the Montane ecoregion, but it's really a digestible way to learn about that resource. So highly recommend visiting that. All right, the last wetland specific app I'm gonna talk about is my baby. And I was late getting my talk to Lynn because I was frantically coding, trying to get it live. It will be live in a couple weeks, I'm fairly certain. But this is the Wetland Data Explorer. Something that's kept me up at night since I started working for the state is what happens if I go away and nobody can access my hard drive. I have all the data. I've been hoarding it for 9 years now. Because a lot of this data is not in any other publicly accessible database. So I've collated all of our water chemistry, soil chemistry, and macroinvertebrate data. It goes back as far as 2011. And so what that ended up being is 31,000 water chemistry records, almost 12,000 soil chemistry records, and then 519 macroinvertebrate samples that you can explore through this. I've got a couple different data visualizations because I really wanted to present the data in a way that you could understand what it means. So the first way I did that is just the way I always start, by putting together a map. So you can choose between 20 different water quality parameters, we've got 30 soil parameters, and then our macroinvertebrate metrics, and see where do we have like high diversity or high salinity in this case, and zoom in and get more details on that. Got drop downs that will also let you select maybe what population you're interested in. So you can look at the distribution of the value of one of your parameters by watershed, by ecoregion, or by wetland type to see, what's a common biological oxygen demand reading. Are there differences in our wetland types or maybe ecoregions? And then at the bottom, there is a table that just puts numbers on all of that. And my favorite part is a download button. So you can take this for yourself. You don't have to know me and my email for me to send you data anymore. Get it off the web. I'm very, very excited about that. All right, I'm gonna spend my last few minutes talking about groundwater apps, but before I move on to that, there are ways you can get involved in this. You can join the Wetland Working Group. It meets twice a year, and it also has a twice a year newsletter about everything going on in the wetland world in Utah, not just the UGS, it's university studies, restoration opportunities. So I highly recommend getting on that list. You can get that from the QR code. Our next meeting is going to be on December 4th. We're having an in-person meeting at the Department of Natural Resources building, or you can do a virtual option. Another thing you can do is submit data. So we try to actively update our plant app and that data explorer. If you have data that is also weighing on your mind that you want to share, send it to me. I'm really excited to get that updated at least yearly. And then you can ask questions of us. I'll have our contact information at the end. Really excited about wetlands, so happy to talk to you if you want. All right, so the Wetland Program is actually a subset of the Groundwater and Wetland Program. And we've got a lot of really cool groundwater apps that have been developed just in the last few years. So the most recent is the Groundwater Data Hub. If you want to know about what's going on with the groundwater around you, they have almost 500 wells that they've got data on. They also have all the data from the groundwater reports that we've put together. You can get the GIS data from reports in 12 different regions so far. On the water level trends page, you can look at what groundwater is doing in your area of interest. So here I have the whole state over 30 years. I zoomed into the closest one that I could find around us, and there is a groundwater well near the State Street entrance to I-80. This is, like, I walk my dog by it and I haven't found it, so we're gonna go exploring. But what you can see is good news. This one is actually on a rising trend. It's been going up an average of 0.3 feet for the last 30 years. You can also look at the data that's available from the recordings that USGS does every year, and you can download all of that data. There's also a collection of documents on Great Salt Lake, because the groundwater story with Great Salt Lake is really, really interesting. And then the monitoring efforts that we do in the groundwater section for Watershed Restoration Initiative projects. Related to this is the groundwater monitoring portal. I didn't find a number for how many wells that they have there, but it's bunches and bunches. I zoomed into Gandy Marsh, which is out in the West Desert, and it's one of the most beautiful marshes in the whole world. And we've got 20 different wells there. And if you find a well that you're interested in on the groundwater monitoring portal, you can look at our time series data. A lot of these have been equipped with pressure transducers that are giving you like an hourly reading on the groundwater level, going as far back as when they were installed, in this case, 2010. And then you can download that data. A lot of them in this particular complex are wetland wells. They only go about 4 feet into the ground, but some of the ones nearby are almost 200 feet deep. So there's a lot of really, really cool data. It breaks our web servers sometimes, but that's just a signal of how good the data is. And then the last one is something that our energy and minerals folks put together. It's the Great Salt Lake Chemistry Hub. The salinity of Great Salt Lake has been a topic of concern for years now. It's so salty, it's really hard to measure accurately. So they wrestled through all of that and put all of the data here. So you can look at salinity, where it is for any of these 46 stations. You can look at the components of salinity, like is it sulfur or sodium, and you can do animations with that data. So yeah, highly recommend going to our website and going through these. go up to the groundwater and wetlands table upstairs and they can do a demonstration of the groundwater data hub. And then, yeah, reach out to us if you're interested. Jess Stern is our state wetland coordinator. So she is collating data on all of the work going on in the state. And if you want a forum to present your data, she's the person to talk to. She's also updating our wetland program plan, which should be out maybe by the end of December. If you want to talk about mapping, Pete Goodwin leads our mapping efforts. He's really knowledgeable and really excited to talk about it. And then any wetland thing that you want to talk about, go ahead and send me an email. And with that, I will take questions.
This is really exciting. I'm interested in where the data for the wetland plant app came from. Like, was it ground truthed species list
Yes.
for every single one?
Yeah, so
Wow.
they were part of anybody that did a vegetation survey. So they've got like specific methodology. They went through an estimated percent cover for every species that they could find. So that's what shows up there.
So is that the part of the data that is still coming in from the new surveys, like the 80s, and then the sections that are new data, or is that all more updated data?
The plant app is going to be all more recent data. We could put data from the 80s if people have it, but you need to digitize it before you send it to me, please. But yeah, there's no time limits on that, but it was put up, I think, in 2018 or 2019, so most of it is within a decade of that.
Hi, thank you for coming, first off. I'm here as a science educator. I'm with the Natural History Museum of Utah. We have a whole floor dedicated to the Great Salt Lake, and kids love to talk about it. I get questions all the time. What can we do? Where can we learn? We get resources. And it's a range of, a lot of kids K through 6, and also they're grown-ups. So I'm curious, do you think any of these resources would be useful to a layperson, for me to point them towards, or is this a more technical approach?
A lot of the data in the apps that you can download is more technical. The plant ID guide, it's full of pictures, so that's a really accessible resource. And then our mapping data, I think, being able to zoom into areas of interest, even if you can't decode all of the codes, it's still a pretty easy visual way to deal with that data.
Thank you.
I just wanted to tag on to the vegetation question. Does that app list when the date when the data was collected for each
It
one?
does.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
it lists at least the year of the study and then the organization that did it.
This is very exciting information and also a bit overwhelming, Becca.
Yeah,
So for practitioners, I'm wondering if you guys had considered like a practitioner workshop of sorts. Hey, you are doing work. Here's how you could use our data to support your work.
Yeah, I had kind of left it as it is on the internet and I'm telling you all about it. But also, we are really interested in talking about our work. So if somebody wanted to reach out and talk about our mapping, maybe how our mapping can be applied to Phragmites treatment, or data that you should use in a literature review before you start your own project, we're definitely happy to do that. I'd suggest being part of the Wetland Working Group. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
Okay, one more.
This is just more of a comment. Thank you for showing the groundwater data hub. Every time we show that, I need to remind everybody, and you showed it a little bit, that most of that data are collected by the U.S. Geological Survey. So we take that in from their site and do the statistics on it. So the statistics are done by UGS. Most of the data, but not all of those sites, are from the U.S. Geological Survey. So
Yeah.
just FYI.
We have a lot of stuff that other people have put the work in.
And the ones with the 30-year trends, that's a subset of the total number that they collect. So it has to first pass that criteria of having 30 years of continuous data.